Did you know he was convicted in 2009 of felony assault of his then girlfriend Rihanna?
Yes.
Did you know he has been accused of rapes and further assaults?
Yes, but I've heard that they've banished it. I made my own business, to be honest. Yeah. I like his music, that's why I'm here. What he's done, I think he's paid enough, like for his problems or whatever. And he's pretty cute to look at.
Yeah, I feel like nobody has the perfect relationship. Rihanna has done an interview saying they were having a fight, so as far as I'm concerned we're both as bad as each other and we're just here for the vibes.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to a new video. Recently I saw this video of fans being interviewed outside a Chris Brown concert. I found it really concerning and just kind of want to talk about it with you guys today. Not only have these people decided, yes, I want to give my time and money and support to a violent man who has a history of hurting women, but they didn't seem to actually care about any of the crimes he has committed or been accused of, and many of them actually made excuses for his behaviour and perpetuated a ton of really harmful myths around domestic violence. Seeing this level of harmful ignorance makes me want to speak out and correct some of the misconceptions people have around domestic violence and also the Chris Brown situation in particular. Just before we get started, because I always forget to do the self-promotion stuff, if you're new here, please don't forget to subscribe if you like this video, and if you've been around a while, check you're still subscribed. Leaving likes, dislikes, comments, whatever is all really good for engagement and helps more people see my videos. And if you'd like to support me and my channel, I do have a Patreon where you can get exclusive stickers and prints and cool stuff like that. There's a few little extra photos that I post on there and some script notes sometimes and all sorts of stuff like that. There's a few extra arty videos as well if you're into that sort of thing, and I also have new merch available that you can get right now. There you go. Okay, now the important stuff. Let's start by talking about Chris Brown's crimes and allegations. So firstly, the video opens with fans being asked if they're aware of the various crimes that Chris has committed and the other allegations against him. Some of them are, some of them aren't.
Did you know he was convicted in 2009 of felony assault of his then girlfriend Rihanna?
Yes. Yes, I didn't know that.
Did you know he has a restraining order against him by another ex-girlfriend for threats?
No. No, I didn't know that actually.
No.
Did you know he has been accused of rapes and further assaults?
Yes, but I've heard that they've banished it.
No.
And did you know that he is currently on conditional bail for an alleged bottle attack in London 2 years ago?
I did hear about that, but I think the guy, I read it today, he has actually withdrawn his charges.
Did you know that? You know about that one, yeah?
I knew that one.
This definitely raises some interesting questions in my mind about how much we should be aware of the history of the people we support and the media we consume. However, before we get to that discussion in depth, I want to just run through quickly a full history of the crimes and allegations specifically against Chris Brown so we know the full context of this particular case. Sadly, it is even worse than this short video suggests. I've got the full timeline here from a Billboard article which you can find in full in the source list in my video description, but to give you the highlights, it all starts in February 2009, where at 19 years old, Brown punched, choked and bit his then girlfriend Rihanna, leaving her with visible facial injuries and in need of hospitalization. Brown turned himself into the police, later pled guilty to 1 count of felony assault. We are actually going to be looking at the police report in the last part of this video, and it is really damn disturbing, so just keep that in your mind for now. But clearly all this started back in 2009, so his violent behaviour towards people, mainly women, has been going on for about 16 years at this point. This is not just a one-off mistake that he made, it's a pattern of behaviour. I don't know if any of you have ever seen the photos for assault. I'm not going to put them in this video because they're horrific, but it's absolutely heartbreaking. Her face was bloody and swollen and bruised. She was covered in blood. This wasn't just a little tap on the arm or something. It was a full-on aggressive assault which could have killed her. 8 years after the incident, he claimed that he only hit her because they were arguing and that they slapped each other first, and that he only really got violent after she spat blood on his face. But as you'll hear in the police report later, there's a reason she was choking and spitting out blood, because he'd been so damn violent to her in the first place. A lot of perpetrators of domestic violence use this excuse that they only hit someone because they were arguing, they started it, blah blah blah. Apparently her spitting blood at him just tipped him over the edge, except like I say, she was already bloody from his beatings over and over again. So you can't blame her for this. Nothing in the police report suggests it was her fault, as we'll get to later. But just... I mean, I know from personal experience as well that a lot of abusers do this. The man that I was in an abusive relationship with, who hurt me emotionally and physically, and just, it was a mess. I remember there was one particular occasion where he started an argument with me. He threw my stuff around the house, threw me to the floor, started kicking stuff at me, which hit me, and Kyra had to drag him off me. And then he trapped me in a room and started screaming in my face, hit me, hit me, hit me. And I was like, I'm not going to do that. And he goes, hit me, hit me. And so I felt like absolutely petrified, because I'm having this man screaming and spitting in my face, like trying to get me to be violent. So I tried to push past him out of the room. And as I did, he was like, there you go, see, you've been physical with me now, like, we're both as bad as each other. And I was like, at the time, I believed it. I was like, oh God, I'm a terrible person. Look at me, like, pushing past him. This is awful. But then, like, looking back now, I'm like, no, I was scared for my life. I was trying to escape. That doesn't make us as bad as each other. That's not me being physically violent with him. That's me trying to escape and save my life, you know? There's a difference between me trying to get away from a dangerous situation and him having anger issues and wanting to hurt me. And I found out later that this was, again, a pattern of behaviour for him, because he did the same thing with his ex. And then, like, because one of his exes told me about it, and then it clicked in my head that he'd actually told me a story about another ex, like a second ex, so a third woman, where the same thing had happened. And he told me that she was really abusive and she was nasty and she used to physically assault him and blah, blah. And I believed it all until I started, like, putting details together of the stories he told me. And one of them was, again, about how she caught him cheating. So he trapped her in a room and she tried to, like, get out and, like, escape from the room because he was being violent with her. And she pushed past him and he fell over and dislocated his shoulder. And he told me the stories in, like, she's abusive, she's nasty, she hurt me in this way and blah, blah, blah. But then, like, after he did the same thing to me, after I heard he did the same thing to this other woman, I put it together and I was like, oh my God, no, it wasn't her. She was literally just trying to escape. It was all him. So I've seen this myself from personal experience. I've heard stories of this from other women. The studies show that this happens a hell of a lot. So any man who can beat up a woman like Chris Brown did to Rihanna and then tries to turn around and say, but we argued so we're both as bad as each other, like, sorry, but I just don't believe them. Not even a little bit. And I also don't believe it was the first time he did that to her. I think it was just the first time he got caught. No one escalates to this point of violence overnight. People who are violent with their partners, not always, but 90% of the time, it builds up in little bits. They push boundaries more and more. It starts with one little thing and then gets bigger and bigger and bigger over time as they get more confident in their abuse. No one just goes from 0 to biting someone's ear and trying to choke them in a car in, like, a matter of minutes. Like, you just, it doesn't happen like that. So I personally believe, but obviously can't know for sure, it's just an allegation, but I would personally believe that it's not the first time, that this wasn't the first time it happened. But that's just my opinion. The reports of choking are another thing that concern me, because again, this is something which usually doesn't happen with a first assault, statistically. It's usually something that happens after violence has escalated over time. It's also one of the biggest indicators that an abuser is more likely to kill their partner. Rachel Louise Snyder discusses this in her book No Visible Bruises, What We Don't Know About Domestic Violence Can Kill Us, where she talks about how serious strangulation is, but how often police and medical reports, especially in one particular study, don't take it seriously or make note of it after it happened. Because it doesn't always appear like there's an injury. Most of the serious consequences of choking or strangulation are internal and invisible. So unless a victim specifically gives details that, like, he choked me, he did this, whatever, law enforcement or healthcare professionals who are making a report after an attack might not know what's happened, or they may unintentionally downplay the seriousness of it. But she writes that strangulation turned out to dramatically increase the chances of domestic violence homicide. But only 15% of the victims in one particular study turned out to have injuries visible enough to photograph for the police reports. As a result, officers often downplayed the incidents, listing injuries like redness, cuts, scratches, or abrasions on the neck instead of, strangulation as it was. She goes on to write, and emergency rooms tended to discharge victims without CT scans and MRIs. What Strack and the domestic violence community believe today is that most strangulation injuries are internal, and the very act of strangulation often turns out to be the penultimate abuse by a perpetrator before a homicide. Statistically, we know that once the hands are on the neck, the very next step is homicide, says Sylvia Vella, a clinician and a detective with the San Diego Police Department in the Domestic Violence Unit at the San Diego Family Justice Center. They don't go backwards. Furthermore, the charity Domestic Shelters reports that strangulation in any context is also known to be the biggest predictor of homicide later on by that partner. In a study of homicide victims killed by an intimate partner, it was found that 43% had experienced a non-fatal strangulation by their partner prior to their murder. In attempted homicides by an intimate partner, 45% of victims had been strangled before the attempted murder. Researchers in the study, including acclaimed domestic violence expert Jacqueline Campbell, who developed the danger assessment in 1987, determined that being strangled by a partner even one time increases a victim's risk of homicide by that perpetrator over 600%. The charity goes on to say that the majority of women murdered in domestic violence homicides are shot, so everyone thinks prevention is about getting the guns. But strangulation is the high predictor of a homicide with a gun, says Casey Gwynn, president of the Alliance for Hope International. And just like Rachel, Domestic Shelters point out that one of the most difficult aspects of identifying strangulation as an abusive tactic is that often it doesn't cause visible injuries at the time of the assault. Based on the published research of Strack, in at least half the studies, there are no marks on the victim right after the assault. While bruises may show up days later, abusers have an easier time denying the assault when the police are called, and survivors are more likely to minimise what happened to them. They often think there's nothing serious about this because I look and feel fine. The more normative strangulation becomes, the more survivors get it in their mind that nothing bad is going to happen, Gwynn says. Strack agrees that strangulation is often minimised. Serious consequences can happen in only mere seconds after being strangled. Preventing air and blood flow by compressing one's throat can cause swelling and closure of the airway, or delayed stroke or cardiac arrest. They go on to say many times these deaths are not attributed to a prior strangulation assault, and an abuser is able to escape accountability for his victim's murder. So I know I was reading a hell of a lot there, but I just kind of wanted to bring in information from the experts who have studied this, who have seen this in hundreds and thousands of victims, and let you know how serious this is. This wasn't just a one-off incident or a mistake. He could have killed her. His actions were indicative of someone who could very easily commit domestic homicide. Just saying. The timeline then moves forward and we see more incidents of violence from Chris Brown. Not as many directed towards women as we'll see later on, but general violence, anger issues, aggression, and so on. So in March 2011, Good Morning America co-host Robin Roberts asked Brown repeated questions about Rihanna during his visit to the show, after which the artist stormed off set and threw a chair through his dressing room window. So it seems, based on the anecdotal evidence, in my opinion, his automatic response to confrontation is violence and aggression. So once again, we're seeing a pattern of behaviour here. This wasn't a one-off incident. It's a pattern of behaviour. And also, if he's doing this stuff in public, what's he doing in private? June 14th, 2012, Brown was invited to a brawl with Drake and his entourage in a New York nightclub in which about 8 people were injured due to broken bottles and punches thrown. The fight was reportedly over Rihanna, who Drake had also dated. So again, more violence, this time aimed at men and women. And also in the name of a woman, like in possessing a woman as though she's like an object. Like, can we not? No. In 2013, there were numerous more violent incidents involving a range of people. So January 27th, 2013, Brown was involved in an altercation with Frank Ocean over a parking space outside a recording studio in West Hollywood, California. According to police reports, Brown pushed or punched the singer. Ocean did not press charges. July 15th, 2013, Brown's probation was revoked for his involvement in an alleged hit-and-run in Los Angeles. The charges were dropped at a hearing the following month after reaching a civil compromise with the accuser. So I've said this in other videos, but I'm just going to remind you, just because charges are dropped, or a person is not convicted, or a person doesn't want to go through with pursuing legal consequences, that doesn't mean that a perpetrator is innocent and that a crime didn't occur or an incident didn't happen. It just means they're not facing legal consequences for it. That's it. October 27th, 2013, and Brown was arrested for felony assault after punching a man outside the W Hotel in Washington, D.C. Brown and his bodyguard allegedly punched a man and broke his nose after he tried to get in a picture with him and two women. Brown's charge was reduced to a misdemeanor, and he voluntarily entered a rehab facility while awaiting sentence. February 3rd, 2014, a judge turned down a prosecutor's motion to send Brown to jail, citing the R&B singer's continued good behaviour and progress in a rehab program. Brown was sentenced to 3 months of inpatient rehab in November after the singer was arrested and charged with a misdemeanor assault over an altercation several weeks earlier in Washington, D.C. February 28th, Brown was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and PTSD. His rehab facility confirmed. According to the court documents obtained by E! News, the facility determined that the singer suffers from both ailments, which are the causes of his history of aggression. They reportedly said, Mr. Brown became aggressive and acted out physically due to his untreated mental health disorder, severe sleep deprivation, and inappropriate self-medicating and untreated PTSD. So while this might offer an explanation for his behaviour, it absolutely does not excuse it. I would say at this point that it's really nice to see someone making progress and actually trying to get better and get treatment, except he didn't. He didn't make an effort and he didn't do better, because just 2 weeks after this, in March 2014, apparently the Grammy-winning R&B singer spent the weekend in a downtown LA lockup after a judge ordered him to be arrested for violating the rules and regulations of his treatment. Court records did not elaborate on the reason for Brown's dismissal from the facility in Malibu that was treating him for anger management, substance abuse, and issues related to bipolar disorder. In May 2014, Brown admitted to a probation violation over the altercation outside the Washington, D.C. hotel and was sentenced to remain on probation and serve an additional 131 days in jail. Superior Court Judge James R. Bradlin sentenced Brown to a year in county jail but gave him credit for nearly 8 months of time served. The credits included time the Grammy winner has spent in rehab and jail, as well as credits for good behaviour while behind jail. June 2nd, 2014, the singer was released from jail around midnight after serving 108 days of his 131-day sentence. Humble and blessed, Brown tweeted after his release. So he served some time for his crimes, his many, many, many crimes, but it doesn't really feel enough, does it? And half of it was spent in like a cushy rehab that he quickly got out of and whatever, and I just can't help but feel like he got off lightly. This doesn't say to me this is a man who has faced his punishment, done some work and learnt his lesson. It looks to me like a man who's gotten away with a lot of violent crimes and hasn't learned anything from it. And how do we know this? Because just months after his probation ended, he was then involved in assaulting another man as part of a group. This was May the 5th, 2015. Brown was identified as the individual who allegedly assaulted another male during a basketball game at Palms Casino Resort, according to Las Vegas police. The man was treated for non-life-threatening injuries which were sustained after a verbal spat led to a physical fight. In a press release, the LVMPD noted that Brown wasn't the only man who assaulted the victim. So as part of a group, but that's still violent behaviour. That doesn't say to me this man has learnt his lesson, has got the treatment he needs, has got the help he needs. He's still being violent. This one's a little long, but this is from July the 2nd, 2016, so just a year later. Police responded to a report of battery that occurred inside a Palms hotel suite. When police survived, the female victim, so we're back to him assaulting women now, appeared to have minor injuries sustained as a result of battery. Metro Police determined that the victim was attending a party inside a hotel room at the Palms Hotel, where an altercation took place over a cell phone. The victim alleges she was battered by Brown when she took out her cell phone to take a picture of the singer, who then proceeded to take her phone from her. According to police, the victim was escorted out of the room by private security into the hallway and proceeded to be escorted off property by hotel security. The victim later returned to the hotel and reported the incident to Palm's security. Though detectives attempted to contact Brown, they were not permitted entry into the room and later determined he had left the room prior to police arrival. Brown's team were like, no, this is all fake, she's making it all up. But a crime report was taken for misdemeanor theft and misdemeanor battery. Personally, I just find it scary how many people are protecting this man and don't seem to be doing enough to keep women and others safe around him. He's got so many allegations against him, so many criminal reports against him, and people are still protecting him. It's a little bit terrifying. There was another allegation of violence against a woman just a couple of months later, and he complained about the police targeting him, apparently. However, it seems to me they were just going pretty easy on him, really, you know? August 30th, 2016, Brown was arrested at his home on suspicion of assault with a deadly weapon. According to the Los Angeles Times, model Bailey Curran said that Brown and another man became angry when she admired the man's diamond necklace. She also said that Brown threatened her with a gun before asking her to sign an NDA. A short time later, Brown posted a series of since-deleted Instagram videos in which he claimed his innocence. When I call the police for dangerous people that are stalking my life, they don't come till the next day, he said in one clip. Let somebody make an effed up allegation about me and oh yeah, the whole effing SWAT team. My N-word, I'm innocent, I'm tired of this poop. He was later released from jail on a $250,000 bail. So I know Chris Brown is trying to claim that, like, oh, I'm the victim, they take things too serious, blah, blah, but, like, they're not actually doing anything to stop you, are they? You're not actually getting the punishments you deserve. And this is sadly true of a lot of abusers around the world who just don't get the punishments they deserve, who don't face the consequences they deserve. Victims aren't as safe as they should be. So Rachel writes about this phenomena in her book No Visible Bruises, where she says that law enforcement, especially in America, isn't doing enough to protect women, and instead is subtly encouraging them to stay with the men who abuse them. She writes, "We give victims the message to stay in other ways too. When our court system puts them on the defensive, asks them to face a person who may have tried to kill them, a person they know only too well may kill them for real next time, we see in court rulings that give violent perpetrators a mere slap on the wrist, a fine maybe, a few days in jail after a brutal assault. We get the message when law enforcement treats domestic violence as a nuisance, a domestic dispute rather than the criminal act it is. I have to believe if the tables were turned, if women were beating and killing men in such vast numbers, 50 women a month in the United States are killed by their intimate partner using guns alone, the problem would be the front page of every newspaper in this country. Vast pools of funding would surface for researchers to figure out what's wrong with women today. And, after all this, we had the audacity to ask why victims stay." She actually goes on to tell the absolutely heartbreaking story of one woman that she worked with who was sadly killed by her partner. Her name was Michelle, and she had tried time and time again to get help, to keep herself safe. She tried going to the police, she tried getting restraining orders, but none of it worked. So she tried a different tact. She tried to back off, she tried to appease her abuser, she tried to flatter him, and it still didn't work. He still killed her. Rachel writes of this incident, "What Michelle saw was what so many other women before her had seen, that an abuser appears more powerful than the system. The gendered messages are crucial. Men are strong, women are weak. Men have the power, women are powerless. Men are rational, women are hysterical. Whether you're a violent abuser or a law-abiding officer, the men on both sides of the Monson equation sent a message to the women. When Rocky, the abuser, bailed himself out, it was an even more crucial message to Michelle. This time, it's not only am I stronger than you, but the system prioritizes my freedom over your safety." Rocky manipulated whoever he could to secure his freedom, in this case Gordon and Sarah, and thus he maintained his control over Michelle. Except now it wasn't just control, it was control and rage. And in these small, separate moments, Rocky showed her something even more urgent, that if she tried to contain him, tried to use the system to beat him, he'd win. And in case she didn't get those two messages, he made sure she understood that he'd escalate, that he'd take what she valued the most in the world, her children. And so, writes Rachel, Michelle did the thing so many victims through the years have done. The thing they might not even realise is a last-ditch effort to keep them all safe in the face of a man who'd always been dangerous, but was now dangerous and angry and scared. A man who was now a bear. Michelle sided with him. She went back into the system and tried to show her loyalty by dropping the restraining order, by refuting her own affidavit. She tried to get herself back into his good graces, buy herself some time so she could figure out a safe way to leave. Another way to think of it is that Michelle Monson Mosier was assuredly not was most assuredly not staying. She was a victim trying to figure out how to become a survivor, not that she'd have thought of herself in this way. Look at Michelle Monson-Michaud. Look at any intimate partner homicide anywhere in any given year, and it will be the same. She tried every which way she could. She tried and tried, but the equation, or rather the question, isn't a matter of leaving or staying. It's a matter of living or dying. They stay because they choose to live, and they die anyway. And I want you to remember stories like this when you hear about people like Chris Brown and their repeated assaults against women, their repeated violent assaults, all the allegations against them. These are dangerous men who, if left unpunished and unchecked, and if we don't educate women about them and their behaviour, if we allow women to keep being around them without any safety, without anyone to protect them, he's potentially going to end up killing someone, because that's what men like this do. Back to the Chris Brown timeline though, we're only in 2017 and we already have so much more to go through. So February 21st, 2017, the Grammy winner was court-ordered to stay 100 yards away from ex-girlfriend Karuesh Tran and not attempt to contact her after she wrote in court filings that Brown had repeatedly threatened her since December. Tran also accused the singer of punching her in the stomach and pushing her downstairs a few years ago. Her filing does not offer any additional specifics or note if she reported the events to the police. It states that no one was present at the time. April 2017, Tampa police reported that Brown sucker punched a photographer after a disagreement over some pictures. June 2017, and Tran was granted a 5-year restraining order against Brown. So May 2018, this one's really bad. Brown was accused of co-conspiring, aiding and abetting a 2017 sexual assault that took place during a party at his house in a lawsuit filed by attorney Gloria Allred on behalf of her client, a woman who will be known as Jane Doe. According to the lawsuit, Doe had attended a concert at One Oak in West Hollywood, where she was invited to attend an after-party at a recording studio where Brown and rapper Young Lo were working. When she arrived, her phone was allegedly taken from her because Brown did not want any phones in the studio. Are you seeing a pattern here of him taking and breaking and just like removing phones from women so they have no way of contacting anyone? Even when Doe wanted to leave, she claims her phone was not returned, and she was then coerced into going into Brown's house in order to retrieve her phone. While at Brown's house, the plaintiff claims alcohol and illicit drugs that she believed included cocaine, molly, and marijuana were provided to guests. She also says Brown handed each female guest, including herself, a pill filled with white powder and instructed them to take it and have a good time. Doe did not take the pill and instead sought to isolate herself in hopes she would be left alone. Meanwhile, according to the filing, Doe's mother, with whom she's usually in close contact, became worried because she'd not heard from her daughter and used an app to track the phone's location to Brown's house. Using that information, she called the police, asking they go search for her daughter. The police did show up, but Brown refused to open the gate and denied them entry to his property. Police left and the party continued, while Doe claims Grissom was evasive and would not return her phone. There, things took a turn for the worse. The plaintiff alleges that Brown, Grissom, and a female guest referred to as Doe X, who is believed to be friends with Brown and Grissom, and to have toured with them, and others plan to use drugs, alcohol, and intimidation to coerce and force unwilling female guests to perform sexual acts for defendants and others. They allegedly lured the female guests into a bedroom, then falsely imprisoned those unwilling to voluntarily engage in sexual acts by going so far as to barricade the door and then further coerce, intimidate, and sexually harass the unwilling female guests to commit sexual acts on the defendants and others. Brown, Grissom, Doe X, and other unnamed defendants were accused of sexual battery, gender violence, hate violence, assault, interference with exercise of civil rights, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and more. I'm going to ask you again, does this really sound like the actions of someone who has served his time, had fair punishment, worked on himself, and learned a lesson? Because it doesn't to me. And it carries on. January 2019, after reports surfaced that Brown had been detained in Paris on potential charges of aggravated rape and drug infractions after a woman filed a rape complaint. His rep confirmed to Billboard that Brown had been released from custody and that all charges have now been dropped. Again, I'll say it again, just because charges have been dropped, that doesn't mean it didn't happen. I fully believe the people who are claiming he's done this. I will just say that. Once again, he claims they're all false allegations, this isn't real, blah, blah, blah. But I'm like, it's a pattern at this point, you know? So many independent women wouldn't be telling the same stories. There wouldn't be independent evidence of you doing these things. We wouldn't have the video evidence and photo evidence of you battering and beating people repeatedly if it didn't keep happening. June 2021, an LAPD spokesperson told Billboard that officers responded to a report of a domestic argument in a place where Chris Brown was known to be. According to TMZ, the woman told police officers that Brown smacked the back of her head so hard her weave came off. However, the Los Angeles City Attorney's Office later confirmed to Billboard that it declined to file charges due to insufficient evidence. And I'll say it again. Just because there's a lack of evidence, this doesn't mean it didn't happen. Just because there's a lack of conviction, this doesn't mean a person is innocent. And I have to ask, why is the legal system not protecting these women? How many women does he have to allegedly assault? How many women have to make reports before he actually faces some real consequences? I was, in my original script, going to make a snarky comment about, like, does he have to kill a woman before something will be done? But honestly, I reckon he could probably do that and get away with it because other men have. Look at O.J. Simpson. So the O.J. Simpson case is one that I was not hugely familiar with before making this video, but I was like, it kind of feels like it might be relevant, so I decided to look it up, and I read quite a bit on the topic, and one of the things that I actually read was O.J. Simpson's book, which, it's just absolutely appalling. It's awful. It's called If I Did It, and it was written as this like disrespectful, disgusting cash grab after he'd already been acquitted of the crime. And thankfully now, any money from the book goes to the victims' families, but it didn't at the time. And in this book, he spends most of the time being super disrespectful about his ex-wife, blaming her for everything, saying that she made him hit her on occasions. He straight up lies. He tries to manipulate the audience. He has, and this is the worst part, the audacity to write a whole chapter graphically detailing exactly why and how he killed Nicole and the other innocent man who just stopped by the house to drop off some glasses for her mum that had been left at a restaurant. And he writes this whole chapter being like, this is all just hypothetical, but let's say I did it, this is how. And he details everything, and it's so damn disgusting. I would argue that, in my opinion, he obviously did it. He was obviously, in my opinion, a repeat abuser, and he was just allowed to keep getting away with it because the system did absolutely nothing to protect Nicole, and it should have. I was thinking of making a whole video on this book, and I guess I will if people want it, but in summary, I've got a few passages to read for you and just kind of talk about them. So he makes a lot of very vague claims about Nicole and tries to paint her as the bad guy, saying things, and I'm going to be bringing this back to the Chris Brown situation and linking them, so bear with me on this. So he wrote, "The fact is, we still weren't married and I couldn't go a week without hearing about it. Didn't I love her? Didn't we have a future? Couldn't we have children now while she was still young enough to enjoy them? These little discussions often ended in arguments, and I absolutely dreaded them. Nicole had a real temper on her, and I'd seen her get physical when she was angry. But so he says vague things like this, but he never actually gives any details or solid examples of what her being physical is. He just complains about her glaring at him or being emotional when he won't commit to her. Or, there's instances of him basically implying that he's cheated on her or been in touch with another woman that he had a past with or whatever, and her being upset about it. And then in his mind, it's her fault that she's upset. And this is exactly what we saw in the Chris Brown Rihanna thing. She found text messages on his phone from an ex. He got mad at her for it and beat her up. And in his mind, it's her fault because she started the argument. She made him hit her. O.J. Simpson was saying the exact same things. He'll always make vague claims about, like, oh, she kind of got physical. She could get physical. I'd seen her get physical. But again, he never gives specific examples. But yet, he'll give repeated, detailed descriptions of violent and aggressive acts that he committed, but he wants us to forgive them because she's the one who started them by looking at him funny or being emotional. So it's not really so bad when he does it. So, like I say, there's all these lines about her getting physical, but he never gives examples. But he'll talk about how he smashed up her car in front of her with a tetherball bat and acts like this is a completely normal reaction because she was upset about him not wanting to marry her. So she's the physically violent one, apparently, but the only examples of violence we see are from him. Later in the book, he talks about all the police reports she filed against him, and he's like, well, you know, the police said there were this many and at this time, but nah, I don't think there were really that many. The police are clearly making it up. And it's like, why? Why would they do that? Why are you trying to manipulate the audience like this? Why are you straight up lying? At one point, apparently Nicole kept this kind of secret diary, which was found after her death in a safety deposit box, in which she detailed all the emotional, physical, and financial abuse that he'd done towards her. And she kept these on like little scraps of notes of paper, little notebooks, little everything, and they were kept in a safety deposit box. And he dares to say, I still say it was fiction, still maintain that these incidents existed only in Nicole's own mind. I honestly can't make sense of any of it. I've tried though. At one point I wondered if she started working on those notes when the marriage began to go south. Except, why would a woman document years worth of abuse and hide it away in a safety deposit box if it was all fictional and made up? It doesn't make any sense. Again, he claims he was never ever physical with her, well, except for these few times that he can't deny because there were witnesses and police and photographs of the injuries. But every other time she must have been making it up, because when there wasn't evidence it was fictional, and when there was evidence he did it, but there was a good reason for it. He claims that the one and only single time he got violent with her, it was her fault because she was becoming increasingly erratic. Most of the time she was a loving wife and a perfect mother, but it seemed like lately any little thing could set her off. And so this is the thing, he spends so much of the book calling her crazy, unwell, too emotional, painting her as this erratic woman. But all I see is a traumatised woman who is acting the same way that any victim of domestic violence and intimate partner abuse acts. She was acting like a traumatised, abused woman, not a crazy woman who was asking to be hit, like he paints her. Of course she was emotional and erratic and constantly terrified. Of course she turned to unhealthy coping mechanisms like drink and drugs later in her life, because she spent her entire adult life, from when he met her when she was barely 18, up until her death, being abused by him. And like I say, even when he admits to hurting her, he downplays it like it's not that big of a deal. There's several paragraphs of him bragging about throwing her around the house, throwing her out of the bedroom, holding her down, locking her in and out of rooms. You know, she apparently tried to slap him a little bit to get him off her, so he's like, well, I had to pin her down and choke her, and it's the only thing. And I'm like, is it? Is that the only thing you can... She eventually called the police on one particular occasion, and he writes, Nicole didn't come back for several hours. She went down to the precinct with the cops, and they took a statement from her and had her pose for photos. It was 3 a.m. by then. She was drunk, she'd been crying, and she was under fluorescent lights without any makeup. Ask me how she looked. They took her to the hospital, and the doctors gave her the once-over. In their report, which I only read much later, they noted that there were bruises on her face and arms. That was about it. I could have told them about the bruises. The ones on her arms? I put them there. Her face? I didn't hit her, but it's possible she hurt herself while we were scuffling. So he refuses to take any responsibility. He thinks that the photos only looked so bad because she wasn't wearing makeup. And I'm like, come on. It's so damn infuriating. And disrespectful. And, He goes on to write, the next day or the day after that, I can't recall exactly, a detective came by to follow up with a few questions. I walked the guy through it. I said I'd been drinking, that we were both drinking, and admitted that I'd become a little too physical. I should have exercised more self-control, I said. It's one of those things that happen in all relationships, he said, and I agreed with him. We'd been partying a little too hard, it was late, we weren't thinking clearly. Hey, nobody got hurt, yada yada yada. Literally, he writes yada yada yada. It is sickening, and I'm sorry, but what the hell is wrong with this detective? Because this is not one of those things that happens in all relationships. It's not normal to beat up your partner to the point where they have to call the police. Well, it's not normal to beat up your partner, you know? And this is kind of the problem, isn't it? This idea of violence against women is so damn normalised. Abuse against women is so normalised that, yeah, some people think this is just what happens in all relationships. And again, this is something we're talking about more in the last part of this video, so bear with me. I personally spent a long time in my early 20s thinking this way. Thinking that this is just what relationships are. This is just what men are. This is just how men love. This is just who they are. Because I've grown up seeing my dad be violent and angry towards women, seeing my brother be angry and violent towards women in general, but mostly me. Like my adult brother when I was a child, like he was so damn violent with me. He turned on my mum once as well. I saw my uncle being violent and angry towards women like his wife. And although my first relationship was lovely, after that, I dated so many men who consistently lied to me, cheated on me, manipulated me, made me feel like I was absolute crap. I was an emotional wreck. They made me feel like I was their second choice over other women. One in particular gave me an STD. Like, we would constantly argue, and I was told that I needed to change. It was my fault. I was too emotional. If I was just more X, Y, and Z, then they wouldn't have to treat me this way. You know, it was my fault that they had to go and look for other women. It's my fault that they were shouting like this. It's my fault that this and this and this and this. I was physically hurt by some of these men, emotionally by others, and I mean, obviously not every man, but like, the majority of my relationships were like this, and I thought it was my fault. And I thought that me being upset by it and not able to cope with it was my fault and a failing on my part, because I wasn't emotionally stable enough, and other women could put up with this, right? Because this is just how men are, and, you know, other women seem happy, so the fact that I was upset by it must be a me problem. Do you see how problematic that is? Like, it was only after going through everything with Johnny and him being so damn abusive and physically violent, and then finally getting those repeated threats of him, like from him saying he was going to kill me. Like, because that was the final straw for me, like the repeated death threats via text and email and everything. Like, it was only when that started happening and one of my friends called it abusive, and I was like, oh my God, and then it just kept going on, that like I realized I couldn't keep living like that, and that maybe what these men were doing to me was not normal, and that this was not healthy, and that weirdly enough it wasn't my fault. So I got a lot of help, and I went to the police, and I went to therapy for a long time, and my therapist helped me notice these like red flags in partners so I could avoid them in relationships. And she helped me build up my self-esteem, and she helped me feel like I was finally deserving of like a healthy, happy relationship. And she finally helped me identify like what a healthy relationship is and what behaviors are healthy and normal and what aren't, because I'd never really seen that growing up, so I didn't know. And I had to have like someone teach me, hang on, you know, a man treating you like this isn't healthy or normal. And it's crazy because since then, like, everything has been so different, and I've actually been able to like meet partners who treat me well and who are good people, where like they're not constantly lying to me, they're not constantly listing off everything wrong with me, I'm not crying every week, we're not arguing every other day, we're not you know, they're not physically violent, they're not abusive or hurting me, or like, well, I'm repeating myself. But like, once you realize that unhealthy abusive relationships are not normal, that's not just something that happens in every relationship. Once you realize that's true, you can say, hang on, I deserve better than this. I deserve a healthy relationship. And you can start looking for that and feeling like you actually deserve it, and you can find it, you know? Does that make sense? Sorry, I'm a little emotional. I'm a bit, anyway, sorry. I think, in summary, the point I'm trying to make is, I think we need to show people exactly what a healthy relationship is and looks like, and help people understand that that's what they deserve, and stop normalizing abuse, because even though it's common, it shouldn't be normal. It is not normal or okay or healthy to be with someone who makes you cry all the time, to be with someone who is erratic and violent, who makes you doubt yourself, who you have to walk on eggshells around. If you have to keep lists and notes of the ways they mistreat you, that is not normal. If you have to spend hours a day reading books to try and help them with their anger management, and then they still won't do anything about it, that's not normal. This is not just how every relationship is. It's not how a healthy relationship should be. And I just want you all to remember that. Right, sorry, back to the timeline though, because somehow we're an hour into this video, or 55 minutes into filming, and we're still not done. There are still more allegations against him. Thankfully, we're up to 2024 now, though, and July. Brown and several members of his entourage, along with Brown's 11/11 tour promoter Live Nation, are facing a lawsuit over an alleged assault that took place following Brown's concert in Fort Worth, Texas. The lawsuit claims that Brown and several accomplices, I can't say that, brutally and severely beat 4 men backstage an arena in an unprovoked attack following the show. The violence included Brown and his entourage surrounding the plaintiffs, throwing chairs at them and repeatedly kicking, stomping, and beating them. The unprovoked violence included multiple strikes to the plaintiff's head and chest and ultimately involved stomping them while they were down. The brutal and violent assault, participated in and directed by Brown, severely injured all plaintiffs. May 2025, this is literally just a couple of months back, Brown was taken into custody after being arrested at his Manchester hotel and charged with inflicting grievous bodily harm, which has been tied to a February 2023 London nightclub incident allegedly involving Brown. The victim accused Brown of smashing a bottle over his head in addition to kicking him. He also filed a civil complaint against Brown for $60 million and is seeking damages for injuries and losses as a result of the alleged altercation. The singer was denied bail and will remain behind bars until his next court date, which is slated for June 13th. May 21st, 2025, a London judge released the musician on bail. Why? After he was initially denied bond days earlier, the magistrate ordered Brown to pay $5.4 million plus an additional $1.3 million in 7 days. He also had to surrender his passport while not travelling for his tour, which kicks off in June, which is happening now. Hours after the release, the R&B star shared a simple message on his Instagram stories, writing from the cage to the stage. So I just read all this and see his behaviour, and I just think he's not sorry, is he? He's not learned his lesson, he's not doing better, he's not paid a price. He's consistently getting away with violent behaviour, right? Okay, we're finally moving on to our next section, which I've titled Separating the Art from the Artist. So, despite all of this, despite this history of violence, Chris Brown still has millions of fans who support him, his music, and are financially supporting him by buying concert tickets, merchandise, and streaming his music. Now, like the video shows, not all fans were aware of the crimes he has been accused of, but some were and just didn't care. Clips like this show that they're just, there for the vibes. They don't give a damn. They're making excuses for his behaviour.
And so how does it all make you feel,
I enjoy his music. I think he's an amazing dancer, and what he's done, I think he's paid enough, for his problems or whatever.
Well, sad obviously, it's horrible, but it's a long time ago, people can change.
I like his music, that's why I'm here. I've liked his music forever.
And it all leads me to ask, how much of a responsibility do we as individuals have to look into the character of the people we're supporting financially and whose media we're consuming? Obviously, it would be impossible to do this completely for every single bit of media we consume, and in some cases, I do think it is possible to separate the art from the artist, but there's a few things we need to consider. For example, what is it that we're concerned about? Is it a pattern of behaviour like we're seeing in the case of Chris Brown, or is it a one-off accident in the past that they may have learned from and improved from since? Is this a person who boasts about how they have a harmful worldview and wants to use the money from their work to actively harm others, like in the case of J.K. Rowling, for example, or is it just an uninformed person who has misunderstood something once and has now learned and is trying to make amends? Is this a person who is a figurehead of a piece of media, like, for example, Chris Brown, or is this, the third assistant to the something on a film who got paid £15,000 and didn't really influence anything but was there and is a bit problematic, and now you want to boycott the whole film? Like, who is it? How are they involved in the project? What have they done? How does it influence the media? These are all questions we need to be asking. And the thing is, no human is perfect. We've absolutely all made mistakes. I've made tons of mistakes. I constantly make mistakes. We've all misunderstood things, got things wrong, had a bad day, and maybe snapped at someone or been a bit mean occasionally. So I don't think we should be saying, if you've ever made a mistake, you should be not allowed to have a career. Because that's horrible and mean and wrong and just, not helpful, is it? But I think there's a huge difference between saying, for example, in the case of art or celebrities or creatives, this person had a bad day once and shouted at a person, but you know what? They've learned from this, they've not done it since, they've got a lot better. I'm still going to consume their media. There's a huge difference between that and, for example, this celebrity has shown a pattern of violent behaviour towards others, including physical and sexual violence against women, and yet they're still doing it and getting away with it. And I'm still choosing to consume their media. They are very different in my mind. I think it's up to every individual to decide who they want to support. Where do you personally draw the line? Like, I'm not going to judge someone if they decided to go or not go to a concert based on something small, like some old tweets someone made, or, you know, if they shouted at a photographer once or something like that. That's your choice, and you know what you can or can't forgive, right? And that's going to be informed by your personal experiences and everything. And I also know that I can't sit here and say to other people, you should or should not be going to a concert of whoever. For example, I'm not going to tell someone you cannot go to a concert of a man who has committed domestic violence, because that's not appropriate, and I can't tell anyone else what to do. However, I can say I would personally never go to a concert of a man who has committed domestic violence, you know, that, like, knowingly anyway. And if you would, I don't think I feel safe around you either, and I personally have some concerns about you and your worldview, and don't think you're a safe space for us victims of domestic violence. There are, of course, other factors to consider. For example, we might want to ask, how much is the person in question benefiting from us consuming their media? So, for example, composers like Wagner were known to be like massive anti-Semites, not a nice person, bit racist as well, just horrible, right? However, he's long dead. And if you want to listen to a piece by Wagner because you like his music, he's not directly benefiting from that in any way. He's not having his worldview confirmed by you listening to his music because he's dead and gone. You know? His music isn't being used to fund anti-Semitism. Like, so you're absolutely fine. However, going to a Chris Brown concert, for example, where he's alive and well and still allegedly committing crimes, you physically being there and spending your money on this stuff physically shows him, hey, we are here, we are showing up in support of you, and we are directly giving you money to do that. You know what I mean? So there is a difference. Another example might be coming back to the Harry Potter and J.K. Rowling thing, right? J.K. Rowling has said that she uses the money she earns to fund transphobic groups and causes, and that actively causes harm to people, okay? So if you go out and buy, I don't know, a Harry Potter computer game, or go see a Harry Potter film in this, I don't know if they're still making Harry Potter films in the cinema, but you know what I mean, something that actively gives her money, then you are actively funding transphobic causes. However, if you want to reread a copy of a book that you already have, or you pick up a second-hand copy in a bookshop and you sit at home and read it in private, you're not giving her money or attention. So some might argue that's morally and ethically better than actively giving her money for new computer games and books and so on. Hey, cuckoo. And I like using these examples because I don't really feel like I have a horse in the race with any of them. They are all popular, but I personally don't really care for the music of Wagner or Chris Brown. I don't like the Harry Potter books, so I feel like I have no horse in this race. Alright, Cuckoo, you got something you want to add? Kara's a little grackly today, sorry. So there's actually a really good book that I want to talk about in relation to this, and this is by Claire Dederer, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce her surname, sorry, but she writes about this in great detail in her book Monsters, A Fan's Dilemma, in which she tackles, and I quote, the problem of loving someone who had done such a terrible thing. I wanted to be a virtuous consumer, a demonstrably good feminist, but at the same time I also wanted to be a citizen of the world of art, a person who was the opposite of a Philistine. The question, the puzzle, for me, was how I might behave correctly confronted with these twin and seemingly contradictory imperatives. And it is damn complicated, it really is, and as Claire writes of her dilemma, I wish someone would invent an online calculator. The user would enter the name of an artist, whereupon the calculator would assess the heinousness of their crime versus the greatness of their art and spit out a verdict. You could or could not consume the work of this artist. A calculator is laughable, unthinkable, yet our moral sense must be made to come into balance with our art love. I wanted for there to be a universal balance, a universal answer, though I suspected maybe that balance is different for everyone. A friend who was gang raped in high school says that any and all work by artists who exploited and abused women should be destroyed. A gay friend whose adolescence was redeemed by art says that art and the artist must be separated entirely. It's possible that both these people are right. And I guess for me personally, one of the problems I see is how if we keep rewarding and supporting these people who do awful things, then they'll never get better, they'll never learn their lesson. And when we allow them into positions of power and influence, their harmful behaviour becomes the new normal. So just look at America. You guys had a presidential candidate with multiple sexual assault allegations who admitted to sexually assaulting young women on a video and audio recording and still elected him president. Twice. He was never punished for his crimes, but instead rewarded. And that absolutely downplays the seriousness of what he did and encourages others to overlook these crimes in others and even maybe in themselves. Like, if the president can do it, why can't they? It emboldens others to commit these crimes themselves. And there's another element to consider here too. How much of the art itself is influenced by the bad behaviour? So in her book, Claire writes a lot about the films of people like Woody Allen and Roman Polanski. And with Woody Allen in particular, she talks about the film Manhattan, in which a 42-year-old man has a sexual relationship with a 17-year-old schoolgirl. And this is discussed at length in her book, so you can go read that book for yourself if you want to find out more. But in summary, Claire says she found it impossible to just sit back and enjoy the film after knowing what Woody Allen did, specifically because of how it presents a sexual relationship between older men and teenage girls. She says she used to enjoy the film, but then after knowing what he did with his, I'm going to say stepdaughter, it completely changed the way she viewed it, and she couldn't sit back and enjoy it like she once used to. She writes about how a writer she knows dismissed her icky feelings about the film by saying, "You're just thinking about Sun Yi. You're letting that colour the movie. I thought you were better than that." Which is something some critics call the biographical fallacy, whereby they believe we should only ever review and try and understand a piece of work or a piece of art or media based on its own merit and on none of the social, historical, or biographical context of the creator and its creation surrounding it. I personally couldn't disagree more. I know personally how much of my own life experiences and worldview affect absolutely everything I create, from my poetry to my art to my photography to these YouTube videos. And I do think it's important to understand where a person is coming from and what their intentions were when creating a piece of work. There's nuance, of course. Like, just because someone had good intentions, that doesn't mean a piece of work is automatically good, or that the intended message of the creator will be the same as what the audience decodes. However, I do think understanding context matters, and it's something we can't just ignore because it's inconvenient. Context shouldn't be the be-all and end-all, but it can absolutely add another layer of information to our understanding of any piece of media. So, for example, this is me going off script for a second and just like talking off the top of my head, but look at the difference between like a book like Vladimir Nabokov's Lolita and Woody Allen's Manhattan. In it, so like in Lolita, Nabokov is purposely trying to write this horrific criminal of a man who abuses a young girl. And although he makes Humbert Humbert charming and, you know, he's trying to be like, oh, you know, it was all her idea, she seduced me, and he tries to like make it out like this romantic love story, you know that in real life, Nabokov didn't feel that way. He's, as far as we know, never abused a teenager, never gone after a child, he's never tried to justify or downplay any kind of paedophilia or child abuse or child sexual assault. Nabokov wrote that book to show how sick and twisted men like Humbert are. And by understanding the context of his life, we know that was his intention with the book. If there was some kind of context in there where we knew that in real life Nabokov had hurt a child or gone after a child or tried to seduce a child, then we might read Lolita with a new context of like, wait, oh my god, actually, was he trying to justify this and romanticize it? And it would change the context of the book, it would change the meaning of the book, and it would change how we view it as a piece of art. That's kind of the case for a film like Manhattan, in which I I started trying to watch it last night and I just couldn't get through it because it made me so damn uncomfortable. You have this 42-year-old man going on about how he's older than the dad of the girl that he's dating. And she is a girl, she's a child. And she talks about like having to leave dinner because she's got a test in school the next morning. And then he has all this dialogue where the characters are like, oh no, I don't think 17's too young. She seems like a very nice girl. But he's like trying to teach her all this stuff. And she's obviously very like emotionally invested in it all, and he's like, oh, you know, but it's just, you can learn from my sexual prowess and my sexual energy, and blah, 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 but it's not serious. And it was just all very icky. And again, knowing that Woody Allen has like groomed and gone after and been sexual with teenagers, it just gives the film a whole, like... So, if you didn't know all of that, you could think that, like, oh, these are meant to be bad people. These are meant to be bad characters. We're meant to see that they're disgusting for thinking it's okay for a 40-year-old man and a 17-year-old girl to be together. But knowing that he did that in real life and then made that film, you're like, oh, no, wait, he actually believes this stuff. He's actually trying to justify this. He's actually okay with this. And it's really damn gross and icky. And that's what I mean. You can't just ignore the context because it shows us what the creator, the artist, the author's intended meaning was. And I do wonder in the context of Chris Brown, how would people think if Chris wasn't just making like generic music? You know what I mean? Like, what if he was singing about, bragging about all the people he's assaulted over the years and getting away with his crimes? Would these people be so quick to say they just enjoy his music, they're just here for the vibes, if his crimes and moral failings and the allegations against him were at the forefront of his creations? Would it really be so easy for them to separate the art from the artist? Because I'd hope not, but you never know. In her book, Claire writes of a conversation with the writer who, I should clarify, he was a man, and he basically told her she was too emotionally involved to critique the film clearly. And she writes of this conversation with him, which of us was seeing more clearly? The one who had the ability, some might say the privilege, to remain untroubled by the filmmaker's attitudes towards females and his history with girls, who had the ability to watch the art without committing to the biographical fallacy, or the one who couldn't help but notice, maybe couldn't help but feel, the antipathies and urges that seemed to animate the project? I'm really asking. And were these proudly objective viewers really being as objective as they thought? And she brings up a similar point to this in a later chapter, where she writes about how the cis, white, straight, male point of view has been the default amongst critics of media for a really long time, and how some can't even get their head around the fact that others will have a different worldview to them, which is just as valid. She writes, there's a perfect example of this in an aside in Richard Skickle's really upsetting 2003 book, Woody Allen, A Life in Film. Skickle deals not at all with the idea that a woman's response to Allen's work might be different than a man's. The idea that a female response might be an important one, might, gasp, be the primary one, is totally beyond the critic. At one point he's talking about the great tolerance that has developed amongst his generation, a generation that can sympathise with, say, feminism. This othering of feminism perfectly demonstrates the total inability of the arbiter to understand that his point of view is contingent upon his own extremely limited subjectivity. It would never occur to him that his point of view might even be, now or one day soon, non-dominant. He's not even considered that his point of view may be a narrow sliver rather than the whole pie. And so I think in summary what she's trying to say is so many cis, white, straight men seem to think that their view is the default and the objective one because it's been the norm for so long. But just because you're the norm, that doesn't mean you're objective and that yours is the only valid view. These men are just as subjective in their views, they just don't realise it. And again, I think a lot of this can be true of the Chris Brown situation. Some people will say that I personally am too emotionally invested in this to talk about it in an unbiased way because I personally been the victim of domestic violence and sexual assault, so doesn't that make me biased? Surely I can't talk about a man who's committed or been alleged of committing these crimes because I'm too biased, right? I can't be objective. Or does that actually just make me more informed on the seriousness of the allegations against him? Should I sit back and let people who only want to talk about the music, own the conversation because I'm too biased as an emotional woman? Or is it okay for me to actually stand up and say, no, my opinion and my lived experience matters too? To sit back and say that you are objective and unemotional about the topic of domestic violence is a position of privilege, and one that many of us simply cannot be in regardless of what we'd like. I can't decide to just sit back and be objective about something that caused me years of ongoing trauma. That is not a choice I can make, and it's not a choice that others make either. Why should I be completely objective about something which is not hypothetical or objective in the first place? This is a real situation affecting real people with real emotions, and therefore the emotions of people are an important factor to consider in this. It's like, sorry, but I've spoken about this story before, but it's like years back when I spoke to Alex O'Connor, Cosmic Skeptic, about the topic of abortion, and he is very anti-choice. People don't realise it, he's very anti-choice. And he basically said to me while the cameras were off, do you not feel like you're... basically first he asked me if I'd ever had an abortion, and I said no, but as a woman you obviously have to think about it. You know, if your period's late, you start thinking, oh my god, what if? If you have an accident where like a condom breaks or something, you start thinking, oh my god, what if? And you have to think, what would I do in this situation? So I think every person with a uterus has had to consider at some point, what would I do if I had an unwanted pregnancy, right? And I explained this to him, and he goes, yeah, but do you not think that makes you too biased to discuss this objectively? And I was like, excuse me? And he genuinely thought that if a woman or person with a uterus has had to consider an abortion or had an abortion, then they are too emotional to discuss whether abortion should be legal or not. He thought the only people who can discuss this are ones who are completely unbiased and have no horse in the game, like him apparently, because, you know, he's never nearly got someone pregnant, and he's a man and he doesn't have to worry about this, and he doesn't have a uterus, so he's the only one who can be objective about this. And I was like, do you not realise how damn insulting that is? And also, how completely wrong. This isn't a hypothetical thought experiment. This isn't a thing where we need to be completely objective. This is an emotive topic that affects real people's lives, and everyone involved, even him, is going to be subjective. Everyone is going to bring their own point of view and their own experiences. And in real life situations like this, we should absolutely be asking the people who are directly affected by it what they need. What are their needs? It's not that hard. Sure, is a person with a uterus going to be more biased towards supporting people with uteruses? Yes. But that is a good thing. How is that not a good thing? That's like saying, I'm sorry, have you ever been a slave, or have your ancestors ever been slaves? Oh, they have? Oh, well then you're too biased to talk about the topic of slavery, and actually the only people who should be discussing whether slavery is legal or not are us cis white rich men who own the slaves, because we're the only unbiased ones, yeah? If you and your family have been affected by slavery, then you really can't talk about this, can you? It would be so damn insulting, and it's the same thing. This idea that the cis white man's point of view is the default and the only objective one is so damn wrong and offensive and harmful. It blows my mind. To go back to what Claire was writing about, how her new knowledge of the context around a creator kind of clouds her view of the media, she actually refers to this as the stain. And another example she gives of this is while talking about the music of Michael Jackson. She says, this is how the stain works. The biography colours the song, which colours the sunny moments of the diner where she was listening to one of his songs. We don't decide that coloration is going to happen. We don't get to make the decisions about the stain. It's already too late. It touches everything. Our understanding of the work has taken on a new colour, whether we like it or not. The tainting of the work is less a question of philosophical decision-making than it is a question of pragmatism or plain reality. That's why the stain makes such a powerful metaphor. Its suddenness, its permanence, and above all, its inexorable realness. The stain is simply something that happens. The stain is not a choice. The stain is not a decision we make. Which actually leads me to my last question in this section, which is, I've been quite harsh about being like, oh, well, you should know better. I'm going to judge you if you support a domestic violence abuser or whatever. But I do have to ask, maybe I am being too harsh, right? Because if I can't decide that the music of Chris Brown, or anyone else for that matter, is tainted and stained to me, then maybe others can't decide for themselves that it's not. Maybe where I think the stain is there and, I can't get rid of it, others just can't see it, and they can't choose to see it even if they want to. Like, how much personal choice do we really have over this, is my question. I don't know. But to conclude this section, I just want to quote Claire one last time as she says, "Consuming a piece of art is two biographies meeting. The biography of the artist that might disrupt the viewing of the art, and the biography of the audience member that might shape the viewing of the art. This occurs in every case." And I think that's completely true, and we need to remember that no one is completely objective about the media they're consuming, even if they think they are. No one is completely objective about any of the decisions they make, even if they think they are. My next section of this video is titled Excusing Abuse, and the next clips I want to show you are some of the most disturbing to me, because they feature mostly women discussing why the things Chris Brown has done and been accused of are not so bad. Some of their claims are completely incorrect, but others are just worrying, like the woman who says she can forgive what he's done because he's really cute.
I mind my own business, to be honest. I like his music, that's why I'm here. I've liked his music forever, and that's why I'm here.
And I just go because I like his concert music, dancing. Yeah, I just find him, and he's pretty cute to look at.
I think there are plenty of things in life that you can choose to mind your own business about, who a person chooses to date or not, what a person chooses to eat, what they choose to wear, how they choose to spend their free time. But I feel like when you know a person has a history of physical violence and has hurt people repeatedly, then that's maybe not the time to be minding your own business. So many people turn a blind eye to violence and sexual assault, and we absolutely need to put an end to that. We need to break that cycle. I have been horrified over the last few years to read report after report of women being assaulted in public, harassed in public, even full-on raped in public in daytime with bystanders standing by and not intervening. It sounds fake at first when you say it like that, but it's happened. And it's happened more than once. Just to give you a couple of examples from one news article, back in 2013, it was broad daylight and there were people in the tube carriage. She should have been safe. She'd fallen asleep, missed her stop, and ended up at the end of the Piccadilly line. But, still on a weekday morning in a bustling city, she should have been safe. And yet, hauntingly, she wasn't. Last week, Ryan Johnston was sentenced to 9 years in prison for raping a 20-year-old woman on the tube in front of a horrified French tourist and his young son. In the case, the detective leading the investigation described as one of the most disturbing of his career. Something about this story, which unfolded in the space of just 2 tube stops, punches through all women's comforting illusions about when and how we are safe. The news article continued with another example. The whole thing stirs memories of a notorious attack on a woman on a train in Philadelphia in 2021, where initial reports suggested none of the other passengers came to her aid, and some even callously filmed it on their phones. But later, more nuanced versions emerged of a slowly unfolding horror that began when the attacker trying to strike up an unwanted conversation, then groping his victim before finally progressing to rape. Since some bystanders weren't on the train throughout, they didn't understand exactly what they were seeing, and those filming it may have been trying to capture evidence for the police. The initial story felt true, chiming with fears about cities becoming lawless or people more uncaring, but in some respects, it clearly wasn't. Small comfort, though, that must have been to the poor woman who was nonetheless very publicly raped. So these things do happen. People just stand by and let these women be assaulted, and it's horrifying. And now obviously this isn't true of all cases. Plenty of people do step in some cases. But the fact that there are times when this can happen at all is horrifying. And I think it all starts with so many people having this idea in our minds that it's not our business, when really the safety of people around us is our business. It should be our business. We should care. We should help the other people around us. I know not everyone might be able to help in every single way, but I don't understand a person who can watch another person be hurt and not do anything about it. You call the police, you shout for help, you say something. You don't just sit back and watch it happen. When someone's life is in danger, or someone is physically being harmed in front of you, it stops being none of your business. And while obviously we're talking about something a little bit different here with the Chris Brown situation, I think the same thing still applies. You're choosing who to support, who to give your money to, who to spend your time with. those are acts which make what he's done your business. And if you're willing to do all that for someone with a history of violence and allegedly sexual violence against women, domestic violence, like, you're choosing to condone that violence and that behavior and making it your business. Do these people ever wonder how his victims feel? Like, imagine you've been the victim of domestic violence or sexual violence from a man, and then you have to sit there and watch hundreds of thousands of people cheer for him, help make him a millionaire, and, you know, talk about how they don't mind, it's not their business, oh, they can excuse what he's done because he's cute. Imagine you're his victim seeing this. I wonder if the people saying this would be just as happy to look a woman or one of his victims in the eye while she's covered in injuries from him and still say that it's none of their business and that they still want to dance and cheer and sing along to his songs because, you know, he's a great dancer and he's cute. I wonder if they'd still say that to his victims. I feel like we forget the human aspect here. We forget the real people that have been affected by men like this. He's cute so he can get away with it, apparently. He's cute so it's forgivable. I've often spoken about in videos how I hate fiction books which show men being abusive pieces of crap, but it being okay and it being romantic and it supposedly being sexy because they're super hot, so the women they're abusing must really like it. I constantly get people in my comment section telling me that I'm overreacting because real life is different and all women know the difference between fiction and reality, and no woman would ever think like this and excuse sexual assault just because a guy's cute. Except here's an example of a woman thinking exactly that. Everything that he's done is okay because he's really cute. There are women who think like this. There are people who think like this. And why? Why can she just excuse his abuse allegations because he's cute and dances well? It's simply because misogyny and rape culture is so ingrained in our society, in our culture, in the media we consume, that we don't even realise how deep it runs and how far it's penetrated into our subconscious. So when people sit there making bestsellers out of books which romanticize rape and abuse and torturing women, and people go on about how hot and sexy these guys are and that it's okay that they raped this woman because he's really hot, like, that is putting it in people's minds that it's normal, that men can get away with this stuff if they're cute enough, if they're hot enough, if they're sexy enough. Some people think I'm crazy to say that fiction influences people's actions and thoughts and ideologies negatively, but I don't understand how people can say that. Study after study shows us that consuming certain fiction can increase people's empathy and social awareness and understanding of others. So why can't we understand that media which objectifies and glorifies the abuse of women may in fact reduce people's empathy for women, may in fact have negative consequences? Nikki D. Phillips writes about this, but with a primary focus on sexual violence in their book Beyond Blurred Lines, Rape Culture in Popular Media. And they say that feminists increasingly pointed to the plethora of depictions of rape in television, film and books as symptomatic of rape culture. They contended that such representations too often objectify and oppress women and ultimately shape and influence pro-rape attitudes and behaviours. Added to this is the potential for these popular images to re-traumatize survivors of sexual assault who inevitably come across them. These themes continue to resonate among contemporary feminist critiques of rape culture. Roxane Gay actually wrote a whole essay about this phenomena of women condoning and encouraging Chris Brown in particular in her book Bad Feminist, in an essay titled Dear Young Ladies Who Love Chris Brown So Much They Would Let Him Beat Them. And she opens with asking, do you know what you're saying? Do you really? You may think you're joking. I want to believe you're joking because, haha, a man putting his hands on you is so funny in the reality from where you're communicating. Clearly we have different definitions of funny. But perhaps you truly do find it amusing to joke about domestic violence. I'm not here to judge you. I am afraid you're not joking. I'm afraid you're quite serious. You're saying you're willing to be abused. You're willing to sacrifice your dignity. For what? You're impressed by some combination of a young man's music, charisma, dancing ability, and or good looks. That's understandable. Everyone's got his or her something. However, you're also saying that suffering Chris Brown's abuse would be a fair exchange for his attention, however fleeting you must realise that attention would be. When you look past the image, a celebrity is merely a person you know nothing about. You're willing to be abused for the mirage of fame in the desert of your life. And I wish the woman in this video would hear these words. Like, you should read this essay. She goes on to say, and as I pointed out many times in this video, did you read the police report from the infamous incident where Chris Brown beat his then girlfriend Rihanna. The details are disturbing and graphic and leave the distinct impression that what took place that night on 2009 was perhaps not an isolated incident. If you were to get with Chris Brown, there's a good chance you would regret it, because time and again he has shown he cannot control his rage. He would hardly be concerned with you at all. This is the man he has shown himself to be. I'm sorry our culture has treated women so poorly for so long that suffering abuse to receive celebrity attention seems like a fair and reasonable trade. We have failed you utterly. And again, this is what we see in so many like dark romance books, or like abuse romances I call them, where like apparently in order to get like true love and a happy ending and a bunch of orgasms, you need to put up with sexual assault, harassment, rape, and all kinds of abuse. Like, that's the message that is being sent and normalised to women, and I don't think it's okay. Roxane Gay goes on to write, "We failed you when Chris Brown received a slap on the wrist for his crime and was subsequently allowed to perform at the 2012 Grammys not once, but twice. We failed you when he was awarded Best R&B Album at that same ceremony. This is not to say he has no right to move on from his crime, but he has demonstrated not 1 ounce of contrition. Instead, he has flagrantly revelled in his bad boy persona and taunted the public at every turn. He's young and troubled, but that's an explanation for his behaviour, not an excuse. We fail you every single time a famous man treats a woman badly, without legal, professional, or personal consequence. Over and over, we tell you it's acceptable for men, famous, infamous, or not at all famous, to abuse women. We look the other way, we make excuses, we reward these men for their bad behaviour. And it's damn heartbreaking to see the consequences of this in action, as with this video, as with these women making excuses for him. It's absolutely awful. The final point I want to touch on in this video is about the myth of mutual abuse. And I've seen, well, okay, just a personal thing here. I've seen some really odd things said about me online where people have said that they really hate me because I believe mutual abuse is a thing. And I just think people might be getting me mixed up with someone else. Because as far back as I can remember, since learning about all this, I've been outspoken about how I think even the term mutual abuse is a misnomer, and how when a victim of domestic violence fights back, that's not abuse. That's not reactive abuse or mutual abuse, it's simply a trauma response. I don't believe there's these situations where like, oh, they're just as bad as each other, they're abusing each other. That's not anything I've ever said. That's not what I believe. And it kind of upsets me to see people saying that about me online, because the only thing I can think of is they're getting me mixed up with someone else. But anyway, a lot of people seem to think that mutual abuse is real, or reactive abuse, if you want to call it that, or like you know, this idea that they're as bad as each other is a real thing. And we get ill-informed and harmful comments being made, like this last clip that I want to show you.
Yeah, I feel like nobody has the perfect relationship behind closed doors, and I feel like because he's in the limelight, he gets a lot more hate for it. And I'm not condoning anything he's done, but Rihanna has like done an interview saying they were having a fight, so as far as I'm concerned, we're both as bad as each other and we're just here for the fights.
Yeah, I think we've all had arguments with people before and arguments with partners, but you know what I've never done is I've never smashed someone's face in. That is not normal. That's not just an imperfect relationship. That's not just something that happens to everyone. That is not healthy or normal. And yeah, sure, Chris Brown and Rihanna, let's talk about that one incident. They were arguing, but the police report says Rihanna apparently found him texting an ex, so in response, a verbal argument ensued. That's normal. And that's where the normality ends. That's where a regular relationship ends and it becomes abusive. Brown pulled the vehicle over on an unknown street and reached over Robin F., which is Rihanna, with his right hand. I'm just going to say this as well. This is incredibly graphic and horrible, so you may want to skip this section because it's not nice to hear. So with his right hand, he opened the car door and attempted to force her out. Brown was unable to force Robin out of the vehicle because she was wearing a seatbelt. When he could not force her to exit, he took his right hand and shoved her head against the passenger window of the vehicle, causing an approximate 1-inch raised circular contusion. Robin turned to face Brown and he punched her in the left eye with his right hand. He then drove away in the vehicle and continued to punch her in the face with his right hand while steering the vehicle with his left hand. The assault caused Robin's mouth to fill with blood and blood to splatter all over her clothing and the interior of the vehicle. Brown looked at Robin and stated, "I'm going to beat the crap out of you when we get home, you wait and see." Robin picked up her cell phone to call her personal assistant, who didn't answer the phone, but while her voicemail greeting was playing, Robin pretended to talk to her, saying, "I'm on my way home, make sure the cops are there when I get there." As Robin faked the call, Brown looked at her and stated, "You just did the stupidest thing ever, now I'm really going to kill you." Brown resumed punching Robin, and she interlocked her fingers behind her head and brought her elbows forward to protect her face. She then bent over at the waist, placing her elbows and face near her lap in an attempt to protect her face and head from the barrage of punches being levelled upon her by Brown. Now, I just want you to remember that earlier interview where Chris Brown said that he only became violent after she spat blood at him. We've already learned that there was such a level of violence from him, which is why she had blood in her mouth that she couldn't contain it. It's not her fault. It continues, it gets worse, it's disgusting. Brown continued to punch Robin on the left arm and hand, causing her to suffer a contusion on her left tricep that was approximately 2 inches in diameter, and numerous contusions on her left hand. Robin then attempted to send a text message to her other personal assistant, but Brown snatched the cell phone out of her hand and threw it out the window onto an unknown street. Again, notice the pattern of him taking phones from women. Brown continued driving, and Robin observed his cell phone sat in his lap. She picked up the phone with her left hand, and before she could make a call, he placed her in a headlock with his right hand and continued to drive the vehicle with his left. Brown pulled Robin close to him and bit her on the left ear. She was able to feel the vehicle swerving from right to left as Brown sped away. He stopped the vehicle in front of a place, and then Robin, again, Rihanna, remember, turned off the car, removed the key from the ignition, and sat on it. Brown didn't know what she did with the key and began punching her in the face and arms. He then placed her in a headlock, positioning the front of her throat between his bicep and forearm. Brown began applying pressure to Robin's left and right cortical arteries, causing her to be unable to breathe, and she began to lose consciousness. She reached up with her left hand and began attempting to gouge his eyes in an attempt to free herself. Brown bit her left ring and middle fingers and then released her. While Brown continued to punch her, she turned around and placed her back against the passenger door. She brought her knees to her chest, placed her feet against Brown's body, and began pushing him away. Brown continued to punch her on the legs and feet, causing several contusions. Robin began screaming for help, and Brown exited the vehicle and walked away. A resident in the neighbourhood heard her plea for help and called 911, causing a police response. An investigation was conducted, and Robin was issued a domestic violence emergency protection order. So if you can read this or hear this, or even just look at the pictures of her from that night and say they're as bad as each other, this is just what happens in relationships, then there is something very, very, very wrong with you. All I see here is a woman who found out her boyfriend was cheating, was obviously upset, he got mad, told her he was going to kill her, proceeded to physically assault her, she tried to get away from him and was almost killed. How are they as bad as each other? Tell me. Explain to me in detail, please. How are they as bad as each other? Rihanna reaching out to poke him in the eyes to stop her from strangling her is not abuse. That does not make this mutual abuse or reactive abuse. This is simply a woman trying not to die. A woman pushing him away with her feet when he was repeatedly beating her is not her abusing him. That is her trying to get to safety and keep him away from her. That's a woman trying to live. As the charity Domestic Shelters writes, to say partners are mutually abusive puts undue blame on the survivor and reinforces the belief that the abuse is the survivor's fault. The mutual abuse myth also supports the abuser's behaviour. When both people are to blame, it can justify their actions. Domestic violence survivors may be assaultive, but that's not mutual abuse. That's reactionary abuse, which I also find to be a bit of a misnomer. They don't want power and control, they want the power and control to stop, says David Kropp, a retired sergeant with the Sacramento Police and an expert witness consultant for domestic violence. What might be perceived as mutual abuse is often violent resistance. That's violence in response to violence, not violence used to control a partner. They don't initiate the violence, and they don't use it with the motivation of limiting agency or controlling a partner. Mindy Mechanic, a clinical psychologist and professor of psychology at California State University Fullerton, who focuses on interpersonal violence, says, they're using it either defensively or preemptively, but it can look on the surface like mutual abuse if you're not looking at who's initiating and who's in control. The article goes on to say self-defense is not mutual abuse. Some survivors think they are in a mutually abusive relationship, especially if their partner, family, friends, or law enforcement push them to feel that way. But if they're not the ones starting the fight, it's not mutual abuse. If you're fighting against someone who has their hand around your neck, then you're trying to save your life, says Mindy Mechanic. This idea that they're just as bad as each other, we're as bad as each other, you're as bad as me, is just another tool used by abusers to get away with what they do and try and downplay the power imbalance between victim and perpetrator. O.J. Simpson tried to do it in his book, claiming that Nicole was angry, upset, violent too. But he's not the one who repeatedly called the police scared for his life. He's not the one who ended up with bruises and cuts and scars. He's not the one who ended up dead. It's the same with this Chris Brown situation. Yes, Rihanna may have been the one upset first because she found out he was cheating, but she's not the one who initiated the violence. He's the one who did that. He's the one who threatened her, told her he was going to kill her, tried to strangle and kill her. She's the one who ended up beaten and bruised. If she used violence to try and escape, that's not them being as bad as each other, that's not mutual abuse, that's her trying to save her life. I'm Alex tried to do the exact same thing after Alice came out with her allegations against him and showed the videos of him threatening to smash her, heading with a brick and all that sort of thing. And he was like, well, you know, sometimes she fought back, so we were as bad as each other. And people fall for this and believe it. And it's so damn harmful to the victims. You're fighting for your life. If you're trying to save yourself, then you're not mutually abusive. You're not as bad as each other. You're a person trying to survive. It's as simple as that. And anyway, I think that's pretty much me done for the day. Yeah, sorry if I've been a little bit stressed during filming this. It's a very emotional topic for me. It's a very personal one. It's something that I feel very strongly about. And also Kyra can sense I'm a little bit stressed today, so she's been a little bit grackly in the background and unable to settle. I wanted to be in and out of the balcony and everything, so it's been an experience trying to get this filmed. It's been a little bit stressful. But yeah, thank you so much for watching today. I appreciate you and your time so much. Please don't forget to leave a like, leave a comment. All of that is great for engagement. You can also go follow me on Instagram at Rachel Oates with a 0. If you want to see some personal photos from my life and all that fun stuff, and cute photos of Kyra when she's not being a little grackle bear. And yeah, that's pretty much me done for today, I think. I have a singing lesson to go to now, so I'm going to take QB on a walk first and then go do my lesson. And yeah, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you guys, and I will see you again soon.